these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, folks. Got a great episode here. I have the privilege of having Richard A. Johnson with us. He's the director of Texas Public Policy Foundation's Booker T. Washington Initiative, which examines primarily the effects of public policy on African-American communities. Richard, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for having me. I'm really delighted to be here and excited to talk about some of the things we're doing with the Texas Public Policy Foundation along with the Booker T. Washington Initiative.
I love it. Let me tell people your history real quick, if you don't mind. It's a long and amazing resume, so it's going to take a little bit, but it's important that people know your credentials. So you were a chief of staff for a Houston City Council member. You've played significant roles in drafting policies related to public safety, public works, housing, community development. During the 85th and 86th Texas legislative sessions, you were chief of staff and senior policy analyst for a House member. You've worked on education, again, public safety, healthcare, workforce development legislation. You have a PhD in education. You've been an educator for more than 20 years, done teaching, done research at the University of Texas Mental Science Institute, studying the efficacy of counseling and pharmacological therapy on cocaine and heroin addicts. You've counseled adolescent males, Academy for Troubled Boys. You're a Texas native, grew up in Houston's 5th Ward, and you graduated from Wiley College, bachelor's in history and government, and you also in the Army. Was just asking about that before we started recording. You joined in 85. You were a sergeant, and following active duty, got a master's in clinical psychology and then a doctorate in education. And also president of Louisiana Prison Chapel Foundation, building more than 20 churches inside of prison walls. So just really appreciate you being with us and sharing with us your insights on these topics that are just front and center for Americans these days, which is race relations in America, police and community relations in America. And frankly, this entire discussion of where we're at as a country with respect to race. And it's a taboo topic generally, but I think it's becoming less so. I don't think we have a choice. I think we just have to talk about it and find the truth in there. And look, what it all comes down to fundamentally is there are communities, and it's usually and it's overwhelmingly communities of color that have just been left behind for some reason. Now, the left likes to blame that 100% on race and systemic racism. And my goal generally is to look past that a little bit and say, look, okay, that's fine, but we're ghost hunting if we're blaming systemic racism, because you can't wrap your hands around that. What you can do is talk about development, education, healthcare, business investment. These are things we can wrap our arms around, and it seems to me that's some of the things you focus on. So maybe we could start there as far as your general philosophy on how we look to help these communities, because I think we all do, and what's the best way to do it, and what have we done wrong in the past, and how can we learn from that?
Yeah, I think the first step is to look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And if we look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you know, the idea of critical race theory was not a weapon or the sword of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, nor was it a sword of Dr. Martin Luther King or the SCLC or the NAACP or any groups fighting for equality. And it's because the critical race theory, the father of critical race theory is critical legal theory, and the grandfather of critical legal theory is Marxism. And so basically that has never been the aim of the civil rights movement in America. Our mantra was equal opportunity, not equity. Mm-hmm. Equal opportunity, and there's a difference. And so when we talk about critical race theory, we need to combat that with the one race theory of the civil rights movement. See, the civil rights movement believed in one race theory.
A truly colorblind society.
There's only one race on the planet. That's the human race. See, Martin Luther King said one cannot begin to live until he can rise above the narrow confinements of his own individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. Martin had left that space of race and using race to be a victim. See, Martin had gotten into the space of dealing with, the human race. And when you realize that there is only one race of people, then if you say, but in order to do that, my pastor, George Foreman, always likes to say, hey, man, you have to sit on the moon. You have to get up, 239,000 miles, and then look down at the planet Earth and say, hey, are you concerned with this group, or are you concerned with the whole human race? Mm-hmm. And see, once we get into being concerned about the whole human race, this color stuff really doesn't work. And I often tell people, Congressman, that no horse wins a race looking back. When you see those horses line up to run a race, they have blinders on. They don't even want to look side to side. They want to look straight ahead. So we have grown. Of course, there are people who have not grown in America who still focus on race, but there are folks, America is not racist. Are there people in America who are so small and think so small that they're narrowed down into these little pinheads of the way they see the world, and the only way they see it is through race? Then they buy into critical race theory. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's fundamentally what critical race theory is. I mean, to define it, it's all problems are viewed through the lens of race, and every outcome has a cause, and that cause is race. It seems to be no matter what, and there's simply no escaping from that. And it also means you can never solve it. It's sort of a cop-out.
Yeah,
really.
My grandfather was a farmer in Louisiana, plus he fought in World War I, and my dad fought in the Korean War. And so my grandfather used to always say, son, you have to have more than one tool in your toolbox. Mm-hmm. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, if you only have a hammer in your toolbox, then the solution to every problem to you is a nail.
Yeah.
So and I tell my friends over NAACP about that all the time. I say, hey man, you guys only have one tool in your toolbox. That's racism. So every solution is to fight it through the lens of race. But look, man, when I woke up this morning and I looked outside and I saw that it was doing a little raining out there, I didn't say, well, they probably figured out how to make it rain just on the African American community. This is racist.
Right. It's a belief that nobody else possibly confronts these issues, whatever that issue may be, which is fundamentally false. Now, again, but the counter argument would be the black community faces it at disproportionate levels, whether it's, okay, so I had a discussion recently with a friend, and we were talking about there's a higher either, I can't remember what it was, either infant mortality or a mother fatality rate post-birth. And there's a higher rate in the third ward. Mm-hmm. And, and I'm like, well, there's probably a lot of complicated reasons for that. Some of which might be behavioral prior to birth. Some of, who knows? It's something that needs to be looked at for sure. But the answer was, well, it's clearly systemic racism. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And education, people don't, the argument was behavioral choices are 100% caused by systemic racism. And this sort of blew my mind. I can't wrap my head around that, but that's the case being made, because the argument goes behavioral choices are a result of poor education, and poor education is a result of intergenerational poverty, which is a result of redlining and things like that. So how do you respond to it?
Yeah, I think they're overthinking.
And you're from this area.
Yeah,
so
no. Let me tell you really where I was born in 5th Ward, which is all black community. and I was born in an all-black hospital, and I was born in the 60s. I was born in 1961.
You don't look that old.
And thank you, my friend. You're so kind.
Yeah.
But I was, and I lived in an all-black community, and I attended all-black schools, and I have 3 degrees from historically black colleges. And let me tell you, racism is not our number one problem in the black community. The public enemy number one is ignorance, education. See, that's public enemy number one. But it didn't just start now. I mean, if you look at the prophet Hosea, he said, my people perish for what? The lack of knowledge. And so what we have to do now is be open to education and appropriate education. Carter G. Woodson in 1935, in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, Dr. Carter G. Woodson said, hey, we're being miseducated. Education is a problem in our community. In 1935. If you read his book today, it'll sound like Dr. Woodson is talking to you in this very moment.
Yeah.
You know, we have to be educated on the right things. The reason why I got a doctorate degree in education, because I saw that there was a correlation between a failing education system and a thriving criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not, the onus does not lie on race. Let me be very clear. It doesn't. White people are not making us not be educated.
But that's the argument, right? It's like the system has created a situation where you can't get educated. You might want to, but you just can't. I mean, what do you say to that?
But that is not the truth. Because right now, if you look at HISD, the chairman of the school board is an African-American female. Mm-hmm. If you look at the congressperson for that area, it's going to be an African-American female. If you look at the county commission, it's African-American male. If you look at the state reps, they're all African. If you look at the city council members, they're all African-American. So and the mayor. So if you have a whole city of leaders in every political subdivision that are African-American, then why is appropriate education still a problem in the African-American community?
And by the way, that's the same case for a lot of major cities.
Sure.
A lot of what you just described, but Baltimore, Chicago.
But here's my big argument. This has been my big argument, and folks up in Austin will tell you this is my big argument. CRT has sucked all the air out of the room. How many people know what CTE is? We know
career and technical education.
That's right.
Well, I know.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
Career and technology education.
So important.
Right now, 95% of the students who participate as what we call concentrators, take 2 or more CTE courses, 95% of them graduate. And of that 95%, for those folks who think that they're just learning trades and not going to go to college, of that 95%, 70% go on and get a post-secondary education.
Wow.
As a stackable on the certification that they receive. So when we have high dropout areas, what we call dropout factories, or that create the school to prison pipeline, why aren't we opening up the door and promoting and pushing career technology education? That has been my fight for 20 years.
We do a pretty decent job of that in Texas. It could certainly be improved. I mean, I fully agree. I mean, I encourage people all the time. A 4-year degree in liberal arts might work for you. Okay, it worked for me. Then again, I was also planning on going in the military. I was doing ROTC. So, but you need a skill, and you know what? Maybe don't pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for it or a lot of debt for 4 years. You can get that skill in 6 months and then make $75K welding pipes.
Let me tell you something. We do an excellent job in Texas. We do an abysmal job in Houston.
Okay. Tell me
and
about
in
that.
Dallas, and in Fort Worth, and in San Antonio.
So the major cities.
And in Austin. Urban centers.
Yeah, the suburban areas have really exceptional programs around Houston.
Exactly.
But so inner city doesn't.
But if you look over in Representative Allen's district, now she has a doctorate in education too, and she comes out of the education space. You know, she's very close with the teachers union, so that means they don't want very much change. But if you look at her district, less than 10% of the students in her district engage in CTE. 9%, one of the lowest in the state of Texas. But Sunnyside is also in her district, which has been named the 6th most dangerous neighborhood in America to live in, where the crime rates are high, dropout rates are high, student success is low. Why aren't we changing the mindset out there saying, look, not every kid even wants to go to college. And
They're trying to survive in high school, let alone think about college.
Exactly. And so why not open up the trades and say, look, what we'll do is have paid internships and paid apprenticeships for those students who are excelling in the trades, and bring industry back in and connect it in those areas so that kids can graduate, and if they want to go right in the industry, go right in the industry. If they want to go to college and university, go there, but don't go to prison.
I want to ask you two questions, somewhat related but very different answers. So what causes, again, just going back to the source of a problem. You said, we haven't figured out how to get better development in these, or get better education, to change the culture of education in these communities. Why is that? Is it crime? Is it broken families? What is the source there? And then the second question is, what kind of legislation, policy changes will we need to get to what you're talking about, where kids are actually, it sounds like they have the option to do CTE, but they don't take it up. So how do we change that?
I'm going to ask, the first answer is very short, and the first answer is leadership. That's the answer. And because I asked that same question when I was working on my doctorate degree with the former U.S. Secretary of Education. I did my internship under Dr. Rod Page. And I asked Dr. Page the same question you just asked me. And he looked at me and he said, leadership.
Okay.
He said,
So unpack that.
He said, number one, you have to change leadership. Or you have to change the mindset of leadership. Because if you have all of your leaders saying that you should prepare your kids to go and get a college degree, a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degree, otherwise your education is a failure. So all of the policies that come out of our leadership on every political jurisdiction is telling the kids become college ready. Nothing is saying really nothing is saying become career ready.
Yeah.
You see, because what happens if I don't go to college? Which it has never been the case for education to send everybody to school and get a degree in liberal arts and sciences. The foundation of education is to do one thing and one thing only, is to prepare American students to provide a highly trained and highly skilled workforce for America, period.
Yeah.
In every field of human endeavor. That includes plumbing, that includes electrical engineering, that includes welding, construction, every field of human endeavor. But we decided to leave off that portion and elevate liberal arts and sciences.
Right.
And so what we end up having is a whole bunch of kids not dropping out of high school, not becoming college ready. And then the ones who get there still not college ready, so they drop out of college owing a big debt that they cannot pay.
Yeah.
So that leadership is number one.
It's a cultural change.
Yes. Now, policy side, we have a bill right now, House Bill 1032, that will provide paid apprenticeships and paid internships for the students who are already taking CTE classes.
Oh, great.
Right?
I love that.
And so no additional money. Only thing it does is it allows the districts to use some of their CTE money to do paid apprenticeships and paid internships. That bill right now just received a date on the calendar last night. Well, you know what happens at the end of this week, really time is running out.
Yeah, it's a sign or die week, yeah.
Yeah, but I watched in the House, on the House floor debate critical race theory, which HB 3979 is a great bill. which stops any of our teachers from teaching that one race is superior to another. That's a beautiful bill. They debated on the House floor 7 hours on the House floor, 7 hours on the Senate floor.
Wow.
Right?
Shouldn't be that contentious.
Yeah,
this is a classically liberal value.
But you know what? It was bittersweet. It was a bittersweet moment for me. The sweet moment for me was to hear Dr. King's words being mentioned on the House floor and on the Senate floor over and over and over again. His words when he said he wanted one day for his 4 children to grow up in a world where they were not judged based on the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Mm-hmm. That was, I think they said that about 900 times on both floors. But here's the thing. It was said by members of the Republican Party who were mostly white males. And the bitter part was to see African American and Hispanic legislators and lawmakers fighting against it.
They don't believe it anymore, and so I guess, look, if I'm trying to steel man their argument and to give them the benefit of the doubt here, what they'll say, unfortunately they've gone well beyond this argument, right? For them it truly is about race. Nothing else matters. But the more reasonable side of their argument would say, look, the reason that you have a high dropout rate and is you're coming from a fatherless home, it's a high crime area, this kid has no chance, so the content of their character is lessened by that reality. They have no chance at education, so we have to do something. Now, whatever that something is it gets a little more unclear. It's usually just spending more money on welfare or something.
But they are doing something. They are doing something. You know what they're doing? They're keeping the school to prison pipeline open. They're doing something. I mean, some of their arguments to me have been, well, Dr. Johnson, you have a doctorate degree. I said, sure I do. I said, but here's the story. My friend David and I grew up on the same block. Now, his parents both were college-educated people. His dad was a principal in high school, and his mom was a school teacher. And they lived on the corner. David loved drafting, and he loved metal shop. Neither of my parents finished high school. So my parents are from the farm in Louisiana. They migrated to Houston. So my parents were both tradespeople. My dad drove a truck, and my mom did interior design and custom drapes. But they put us in a community around a lot of people who were highly educated people. And so I thought, hey, I have to get an education, right? So I said, well, look, I'm going to get an athletic degree or an academic degree, scholarship. I got to get a scholarship because my parents can't afford to send me to college. But David loved drafting. He loved metal shop. So when we graduated, and Hughes Tools had a program at our school. So David interned, and he did apprenticeship with Hughes Tools and the whole 9 yards. So when we graduated, David went to work for Hughes Tools. And I got a basketball scholarship, so I went and played basketball in college. So when I came home my sophomore year, I put my stuff up, and I said, hey, told my mom, I'm going to go holler at David. So I went down the street. I knock on the door. Miss Rayburn comes to the door. And I said, hey, is David home? I'm home for college. She said, yeah, he's at home. I said, hey, let him know I'm here. She said, no, he's at his home. I said, David has a home? She said, yeah, David's bought his first home, but I'll call him and tell him you're here. And so David comes over. This is probably before your time. He comes over back in the 70s, man. Custom vans was a thing, He has this brand new custom van, man, and it's decked out in every kind of way. And I looked, I said, wow, I should have took drafting in metal shop.
Yeah. And that's a good argument for the tech. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is like the communities that are really having problems, right? Like you said, the place with the fifth most dangerous place to live in America. Mm-hmm. So what are the underlying causes there? From a policy perspective, I think we've hit education pretty well. what else needs to be done, right? Because kids can't concentrate in school if they've got a broken home life, if they're worried about being recruited by gangs or gang shootings, whatever it is. What are the series of things we need to think about? Again, the left just wants to blame it all on systemic racism and ghost hunt, right? We're only looking to the past. Well, you can't change the past, so you do have to look to the future at some point. And so, and in Republican circles, we talk about opportunity zones, school choice. This is some of it. We talk about community policing. When you look at the data, it's overwhelming that the primary cause of all problems, whether it's the going to prison, bad education, it's fatherless homes. So and that's an overwhelming problem in the black community. So how do you deal with it? How do you do that?
Well, the first thing I was running for public office and running against one of your colleagues. I was running against Sheila Jackson Lee. And so I was running for public office and I was out canvassing the community. And I canvassed Sunnyside, and so a group of the gang members saw me, and I passed out my stuff, And so they had some questions for it. First, they were surprised. They said, "Hey, man, we're so surprised to see you. You're out here. Don't you know how dangerous this community is?" I said, "Yeah. I grew up in 5th Ward, though, so it's just as dangerous." So, and so they said, well, they got real comfortable with me. I told them a lot about jobs and stuff like that. So I said, look, and I knew that they were selling drugs. I said, well, look. Let me ask you guys a question. I said, if I were able to give you something equal to or better than what you're doing to make a living, would you put down what you're doing and pick up what I bring to you that's better and legal? And they looked at me and said, Dr. Johnson, it doesn't have to be equal to or better. I would stop if I could get something else. You see, these are young folks. See, when David and I were in school, I came out of school in 1979. 1979, the state of Texas only had 17 state prisons. By the year 2000, it had 137. So we built 120 prisons. But what did we do? We took vocational education out of our high schools. Okay. And then we shifted it over to community colleges, thinking everybody was going to go to community college. But if you Google right now, the average age of a community college student is 28 years old.
Yeah, it's usually somebody coming back, maybe
knocked their heads, got a felony, going through and say, well, I better go learn a trade. Well, we had that in high school.
Interesting.
And so we had, when I got ready to graduate, it was 3 things. Say, hey, are you going to go to college, or are you going to the military, or are you going to work for somebody? Nobody said you're going to jail. And so at that time, we thought about family. I grew up in an all-black neighborhood right here in Houston. Guess what? I didn't know anybody who didn't have a mom and dad at home.
Yeah. What changed in the last few decades? So you mentioned one thing. I mean, career technical education in high school has changed a lot.
The pathway to honest employment changed. See, around 1982, they took that out of the high schools, and guess what happened in the 1980s? Crack cocaine, all those things seeped into inner city communities, and that became an employment for individuals. You mentioned in my bio that I had a drug treatment program for inner city boys in Fifth Ward on Lowndes Avenue for 13 years. Well, I came back from the Army, and I saw that crack cocaine had taken over our communities, so that became the war that I entered into.
Yeah,
that's the reason for the master's degree in clinical psychology, and the license in marriage and family therapy, and license in chemical dependency counseling, was to treat my community. And I had a 51-bed facility, so they stayed there on the campus with me, and it looked like a boot camp because I had come out of the Army and I brought that same military discipline to it. But the deal is, I learned that 95% of my boys, which I only took, and I had an agreement with the courts here, Judge Eric Andale at that time was the main juvenile judge here in town, and he would say, look, if you can't survive at Golden Eagle, I'm going to send you to jail. And so I would tell him, only send me the worst boys here in town. And so with those young men, I found out something. None of them, maybe 2%, but 98% were not addicted to ingesting drugs. They were selling drugs. You see, when we took that employment and that skills training and all that stuff out of high schools, and we told everybody to go to college, 50% of those guys went straight to the streets.
Yeah.
And they started getting their CTE on the streets, and they started getting their paid internships and paid apprenticeships on the streets. That's why House Bill 1032 is so important. That's up right now. Yeah. Right this very second, today. If they wanted to get that thing to the floor and vote it out, they could do it. But if a couple of days go by, that's over until 2 more years.
Are you optimistic on that? I'm not following it. I'm too closely.
You know what? I'm very optimistic because at every stage of the bill, people have told me, "Well, Rich, don't raise your hopes up too high. It may not get to the House floor. It made it to the House floor, then it made it off the House floor. Well, Rich, don't hold your hopes up too high." But we keep pushing for that bill, and so
it passed the House. It's in the Senate.
Yeah, it passed the House, in the Senate, passed out of the Senate Committee on Education. Now it's a date on the calendar. Will it get heard? I'm calling people and telling everybody to call Lieutenant Governor Patrick and make sure it gets a hearing on the floor. If people get a chance to hear it, I know that it'll get beyond the bipartisanism that's going on, because the polarization between the Democrats and the Republicans is there. But this is a bipartisan bill. We have Democrats and Republicans on it, and I'm hoping that it makes it through.
I hope so too. I mean, apprenticeships they're just a proven way to get that skills training and to get people on the right track. I think that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you've been talking about how we expanded prisons and a lot more people in prisons. What are your thoughts on generally? Did we overpopulate the prisons? The room for criminal justice reform. Is that part of the long-standing problem?
That is a part of long-standing. Well, and reentry. Reentry is a big deal. If you want to talk about the positive side, if we could look at reducing recidivism rates, and by using tools like reentry, but the key to that is going to be industry. The key to most of it. That's why so many of us became so in love with President Trump, was because President Trump said, "Hey, I'm gonna give you guys a way to go to work and make a living and be decent, make a decent, honest living with integrity." See, when you're going out trying to get welfare and you're begging, you don't have integrity.
There's no dignity.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Grubbling for something to eat. Right. Those kinds of things. But when President Trump came in, and everybody initially, the first time, I'm gonna be quite honest, in 2016, I didn't vote for President Trump. Yeah. Because I was like, man, I didn't know much about President Trump, and I said, this guy, he's an outsider, man. He's not going to be able to know how to work the system. He's bold, he's strong, like we like him, but after that, man, after I watched him for a little bit and I started to see him do the things that he said he was going to do, I said, wait a minute, this guy's doing exactly what he said he's going to do. Yeah. Then I watched him a little bit longer. I said, this guy is really making it happen. Then I became a fan, I not only became a person who's going to vote for him, I went out and told other people, look, this guy is really making it happen. A lot of those other guys talked a good game. He is really doing exactly what he said he's going to do. He said he's going to approach criminal justice reform. We couldn't get criminal justice reform touched in 8 years under President Obama. But here come President Trump, not an insider, but an outsider, and he gets the First Step Act passed.
Yeah.
That was huge.
It was huge. And, as it is somewhat more, especially in our libertarian side of conservatism, I don't think we should lock people up that we're afraid of, not people that we're mad at. I think that's a good philosophy to stand by. If you're not a danger to society, it's unclear to me why we put you in jail.
You're right. But here's the thing: 80% of the guys who are locked up in Texas are there for nonviolent offenses.
Yeah. Well, what some people tell me on that one is what often happens is they did commit something that was violent, but they got it bartered down to a lesser charge, in the negotiation. So, the data is mixed on it. One of the problems I wanted to ask you about too is in Houston, there's a lot of judges letting people out without bail, and then we see that that person committed another crime, and the thing is those crimes are generally committed in lower income neighborhoods. Like those are the people hurt by these criminals that really should be in jail. I mean, they held somebody up at gunpoint. That's a person we're afraid of, not a person we're mad at, right? Put them in jail. Right. And I don't. And in this kind of no bail, again, it feels like a very false sense of compassion. This bail reform movement that's happened across the country, and crime has skyrocketed. And it's not in the white suburbs where crime is skyrocketing. Okay, it's in inner city communities, and they're the ones who were hurt the most by this. But it's Democrat politicians pushing for it, and that's who represents these people. So
yeah, and one of the things that we go over through it a lot of times, and I've had these discussions with my colleagues at TPPF, right on crime. We look at, say, an honest guy, right? Honest guy has some traffic violations, and we put this guy in jail, and he loses his job, and because he loses his job, he loses his family, he loses everything, and he's still in jail for traffic violations. Okay, maybe that's a guy we need to let out and try to work with. But you have this other guy who everybody in the neighborhood knows killed so-and-so and killed this person and selling drugs, and you put them in jail, and because they can afford to pay the bail, they're out in 2 days. Mm-hmm. So the community says, look, man, the system is messed up. Here's Dan over here. Dan is just an honest guy, but, he couldn't pay the ticket, and he couldn't take off work to go to the court, because if you take off work, he's going to lose his job. So he didn't go to court, so they got a warrant. So now he gets picked up, and he still loses his job. Yeah. And so Dan gets really messed over with the bail system. But here's old Richard over here. He's selling drugs on every corner, and everybody in the community knows. They scared to say anything. Richard over here, he done killed 2 or 3 people, and everybody's scared to say anything. The police pick him up, and everybody see him back out in 2 days. Yeah. You see, so is there room for reform? Absolutely. We want to keep the people, like you said, the people who are dangerous, they need to stay in jail. And the people who are not dangerous, they need to be worked with on these little fines on how they going to be able to make maybe $25 a month or something, because a lot of these people just making ends meet. Right. And
a lot of that, it's up to the judge's discretion, and how they interpret those statutes, and I guess the solution, and a lot of this is at the state level. This isn't something I necessarily would be dealing with, right? But it's worth talking about, because we have seen that crime rate skyrocket. Mm-hmm. Every police officer tells me the reason is because of bail reform. And in some communities, it's because they've defunded police. Luckily, that didn't happen here in Houston, although we don't have a lot of police compared to major cities. So
let me ask you a question, though. How many people, and I think this would be interesting for us to look at, how many people do you see that are out there committing these tough crimes? Mm-hmm. In the community? How many
it's a very small amount.
What I'm saying is, how many of them do you see that are actually construction workers? Oh yeah. How many of them do you see that are welders, who are out there, have a job they're going to every single day? Right. See, one of the things that you and I had a friend of mine who developed this lock, and got a patent on it. And so he came to me and he said, well, hey, man, I want to see if I can get the military to buy my lock, Mm-hmm. I said, great, let's go to Fort Hood and talk to some people over at Fort Hood. So we went to talk to some people at Fort Hood, and they said, well, look, our biggest problem is not folk breaking in folk houses, you see, because everybody here got a job. Yeah. You see? Yeah. So when you're in a place where everybody has a job, crime goes down.
Yeah.
And see, when I came home from the military, that was the only thing that I really did not like about civilian life, because you could actually be living next door to somebody as a civilian who's unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
In the military, everybody you live next door to, everybody you live around, everybody you encounter have a job. And so they're not thinking about how to go rob the PX
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
the
that's true.
commissary.
That's true.
You see what I mean? And so only thing I'm saying to you is I know that we look at healthcare, we look at education, housing, we look at being able to take care of families. Most of that is solved by having a job.
That's absolutely right. I mean, when you're looking at core solutions, right? Where do we? And then it's a pyramid up from there. What is it's sort of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Sure.
And those basic needs are met by simply having a job, and that's a mental need too, and the sense of dignity, like you said. And then you can more ably afford these other things, whether it's healthcare, education,
housing.
Housing,
you don't worry about housing because I can go get a house. I mean, I work every day. Most jobs that you'll have will provide some sort of health care on the job.
Yeah.
See those things. So when all these social injustices that people say are going on, well, black people are affected disproportionately by housing, affected disproportionately by health care, affected disproportionately by this or that. Well, look, let me get skilled up the way we did back in the 70s. I call it back to the future.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
What's so fascinating is racism was so much more prevalent in the 70s than it is now. And yet we have it seems like we have more problems with it now.
I think we had more racial segregation than we had in terms of racism, because we were more segregated. Because when I first went to high school, I was one of the first groups that were bussed over from Wheatley. Instead of going to Wheatley, we went to Fur High School. So that was the first time they really enforced integration. Mm-hmm. And it was, and most people say, well, those people didn't want you there, this, that, and other. No, the biggest problem is the folks in our community didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
The folks in our community still wanted to go to Wheatley. And so there was a lot of strife behind that, but over time, everybody settled in and became friends and started working together, and before you know it, everybody graduating together in the whole 9 yards. But what we have right now is a small group of folks who have elevated a theory of ignorance to a level of national proportion. Mm-hmm. Critical race theory is a theory of ignorance.
Yeah, and it enforces segregation too.
It's stupid.
I mean, there's
it's a stupid thing to follow, because that means that with all of my education, all of my experience, and all of my wisdom, I narrow everything down to a skin color.
Right.
Which I know that to be crazy. You know it. I mean, in the military, we're there together. I mean, I met guys from all walks of life, all nationalities, working toward one goal, and that is to protect and serve the interests of the United States of America, man. And so basically, for a guy like me to reduce my thinking down to everything that goes on in my life has something to do with the color of my skin is a stupid thing for me to think about.
Yeah, and you've written about this, how appalling it is when you see this movement towards segregated dorms, segregated graduations, and you got to ask yourself, what is the point of this? Isn't this a reversal of progress?
Why did Martin die? Why did Martin Luther King die?
Not so we could be more segregated.
Right. You know what I mean? What was Harriet Tubman fighting for? What was Booker T. Washington fighting for? What was Frederick Douglass fighting for? What were all the folks whose shoulders upon which we stand, who made great contributions to this American idea? Why did they live and die, man? if we're going to go back and say, you know, you're white and I'm black and you stay over there and I stay over here, and, you know, I think I'm better than you and you think you're better than me because of the color of our skin and not because of the content of our character and the way that we think, operate, and participate in this American idea.
So going back to education, school choice isn't something we talked about. I think we've beaten the hell out of the dead horse on technical education and vocational training and why that's important. And I love that. I mean, it's a huge passion of mine as well. But school choice, you know, it's I'm personally in favor of it, but it is a decision that happens not even at the state. I mean, it's the regional decision oftentimes, and that's where all the mess starts happening because, you know, the school. Walk us through the politics of school choice. It's got overwhelming support in the black community because it's a very easy concept to understand. If I don't like how my kid's doing here, I can just move them to a different school. How about that? But teachers unions don't like it. Schools don't like it because the money does follow the student. They feel like if they have a failing school, then they lose money, and then their school is even worse, and the parents and the students who are stuck there have even worse outcomes. So that's their counter argument to it. So we'll walk us through the politics of it.
Yeah, I've coined the phrase parental freedom, and school choice is parental freedom. Parents having the right to choose the best possible educational options for their kids, you know, and to take away my parental freedom. I had this argument with a friend of mine. He's a lawyer. He used to be a dean of a law school. And I said, look, what's wrong with parents having the freedom to make the best possible choices for their own kids' education? He looked at me and he said, Richard, they don't know any better. I said, they don't know any better. And I said, now, my two parents never finished 8th grade. But my two parents worked hard and put me in a neighborhood around educated people. And they sacrificed for me. So what you're telling me is that you know better than they do? And I became a doctor and a veteran, went to the military, did all that. I said, I can tell you this. And I told him, I said, look, man, that's the biggest problem in the world right there is elites think that they know better than the parent knows. I got 4 kids, and I know you probably love kids to death, but you're not going to love my kids more than I do.
Yeah, that's true.
You ain't going to, that's a job you're not going to do. You're not going to outlove me with my kids.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So I am going to figure out the best possible option for my kids. And I often tell this story. My wife wanted my 2 kids to go to private school. When they were very young, all the way, she said, I want them to go to private school up to the 6th grade. And so she put them in St. Mary's over in 3rd Ward. And I said, well, we're paying these high taxes, man. I'm paying big school taxes, you know? And she said, I want the kids to go there. They're going to get a better education there. And I was like, well, look, you know, we're not even Catholic. She said, but I want my kids to go to school. So that happens, and I had to get a second job to help pay because I had to pay my taxes, my full school taxes where I was living, plus my full tuition for my kids to go to a private school. And I came up with this brilliant idea. I was like, why can't some of the money that I'm paying over here follow my kid? That would alleviate some of the burden from me.
A voucher of some sorts. Yeah.
Anything that, you voucher, piece of paper, anything. But it didn't happen. So then I became a proponent for school choice at that time because I said, I'm being denied an opportunity to send my kids somewhere. Because at that time I wasn't Dr. Johnson. I was working on a doctorate. And she didn't have an MBA. She was working on one. Yeah. And so we were struggling, but we had kids, so we wanted to put them in a best possible position that we could. But what if my dollar could have followed my kid? Yeah. I mean, my 2 kids. That would have made things so much better for me And so I became an advocate for school choice and for the dollars following the kids, because if you're locked into a zip code and you can't afford to send your child somewhere else, then you have to send your child to a dropout factory, which most of the folks who go to TDC, if you check their zip codes, they're coming out of them same areas.
Yeah.
And so those folks are locked in to a system that is failing. And for the teachers unions to fight that battle and keep those folks locked in there, that's criminal.
Yeah, it is. And look, I get their point that it defunds those schools, but there's a way to good because it causes competition, right?
Good. You know what's going to happen when their budgets start going down? People there are going to start figuring out what these other folks are doing. And they're going to start innovating, and they're going to start changing, and they're going to start making sure that student success happens. If you start seeing money leave your bank account, the first thing you're going to say, wait, what's going on? I need to make some changes. So those things, that's free market. When you let the free market happen like that, and those dollars start leaving there, those schools will change and they will become more competitive.
Well, what are some of the driving reasons of a so-called dropout factory? I mean, is it one thing I've noticed over time is a complete lack of discipline in schools. I was terrified of teachers growing up. Terrified. Mm-hmm. I was suspended for the stupidest of reasons. Okay, like talk about injustice. My goodness, I wrote about it in my book. I mean, it's a ridiculous story. I'm not going to get into it. But I was terrified. I felt like there was a high amount of discipline. I felt like teachers had the right to and the freedom to say like enough is enough. You're disrupting class. I don't get the sense that that's true anymore. And now actually it's been labeled as racist to do that. Mm-hmm. So there's a few students that can completely destroy the learning environment for other students. I don't know. Is that the big problem? What causes this?
Two things. One is discipline. Because you can't teach the class if you're scared of the class. And when I was in school, I went to the principal's office, assistant principal's office, and Mr. Cheney said, "I see you have some discipline challenges." And I said, "Well, they say I have some discipline challenges." He said, "Well, have you ever met the Board of Education?" I said, "Well, I've never seen them before." So he came out from behind his desk, raised his paddle, he said, "This is the Board of Education."
You a little different. You get thrown in jail now.
He said, "You're about to meet the Board of Education."
Yeah.
And so discipline has changed. And the other side of that is academic programming. Mm-hmm. We don't have those vocational education. I keep going back to that because so many different. Well, it's invaluable in those inner city communities because those folks are looking for a way to make a living. School has to be a way to make a living.
So they see this what they're learning and they're like, this is pointless.
It's no good. I mean, I'm not going to do this, and so I'm going to go out here and make some money right now. I'm going to drop out.
Yeah.
And when they drop out of education, they drop into criminal justice.
And I feel like you can do both. I mean, you take a variety of classes throughout the day. You can teach the classics and, the things that, we think you need to, because I still believe in some kind of foundation of history but you're right. Some of that has to be functional.
Yeah, these kids are like they're like adult learners. Adult learners, you have to have a reason for them to do it. Mm-hmm. If they don't have a reason to do mathematics and it's not leading to anything to them, it's not leading to a job, they're not going to do it. Yeah. But they'll become a street chemist and they'll be a mathematician on the street.
Yeah.
You see, because why? There's a reason to do it. But if you're going to be a plumber, you have to learn percentages, you have to learn decimals, you have to learn fractions, all those things.
The physics of pressure and all these things,
all those things. So if we would just get back into understanding why we need to educate kids, and the main thing, like you said before, you can't be afraid of them. My first teaching job when I came back from the Army was at Wheatley High School. And I was so glad to get that job at Wheatley because Barbara Jordan had gone to Wheatley, Mickey Leland had gone to Wheatley, and Wheatley was famous, man, for African American leaders. You know, our current chairman of the Public Education Committee, Harold Dutton, Representative Dutton, had gone to Wheatley. But when I got there, man, you know, I found out it wasn't the same Wheatley that they had gone to.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. One guy came in with me, and by lunchtime, he quit. He said, look, they can't pay me enough to stay here. But, you know, I had just come out of the Army, man. I hadn't even been out of the Army 2 months, and I was just blessed to get that job. And I was like, hey, man, I went in there, and every unit has the M60 gunner, so I was M60 gunner for my unit.
Nice.
And so I was a really tough guy when I went in there. And so these guys came in, I said, look, put the music off and sit down and be quiet. So the word got around the school that I was shell-shocked and say, you know, that new guy, Mr. Johnson's shell-shocked, so go in there in his room, be very quiet, and do exactly what he said. So I ended up staying there. But you can't be afraid of those students, my point. And discipline is a big issue right now in those inner city schools.
Yeah. Especially because, again, like one student can ruin the whole learning experience for the whole class. It's not like everybody's a bad student. You know, but one guy, usually a guy.
Yeah.
Boys are rambunctious. What can you say?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, I mean, it's important that we just sort of have a list of policies that work. And I think Republicans need to lean into this a lot more. And look, like what makes a community better? Technical education, you know, things we can control. Because I can't control. I don't know what policy I could put in place that would reduce fatherless homes. It's a big problem. I don't know how to solve that. Okay, so what else can we do? Technical education, community policing, a better criminal justice system that encourages a life after prison, if you even deserve to go to prison in the first place. Like really putting some thought into that, you know, and opportunity zones, investment, jobs actually have to be available in a place, and they're not going to be available unless it's safe, right? Because no business wants to open up in an unsafe place. And
yeah, but I mean, if you look at Texas prior to the pandemic, Texas had a 14% mid-skilled jobs level gap. That means we had 14% more jobs than we had people trained to fill them.
Yep.
And that gap has only widened since the pandemic.
Well, this damn unemployment insurance is killing businesses.
So the workforce development and skill building and skilling up is the mantra for the day. And
it's also the only way you get growth in the economy.
Exactly. And the main thing is, really, that's the only way you really build families, because most of the young ladies in the African American community they're having children, but they're not marrying these guys. These guys are out on the street. Mm-hmm. See, back in my day, these guys either had a job, military, or going to college. So we were marriage material. You see, and we're somebody that they could be proud to take home to their father or to their mother and say, hey, I'm going to marry Richard. Richard's going to the military. I'm going to marry Richard. Richard's going to college. Right. Well, you know, if I come up, if one of my daughters bring up a young guy and say, I'm going to marry so-and-so, he's hanging out on the street. She can't bring that person up to her dad. Right. I mean, and it'll be tough for them. I have two daughters. I have two sons and two daughters. Yeah. And so it'll be very tough for them to bring somebody up to me that doesn't meet up to standard because they know their dad. Yeah. You see? And so basically, if we in our community, we had no choice. We were going to one of those three places. Nobody was talking about going to jail. And so young ladies then, they were like, hey, they were proud of us. And so that's why I fight so hard for those bills. But we do have another bill, SB 1365, Senate Bill 1365, which will clear the way for the Commissioner of Education to take over HISD, because when a system is not working, the education system, the ultimate blame goes on the state. Because the buck stops with the state legislature, right, in terms of being responsible for educating students in the state. Mm-hmm. And so when a district is not working, then it needs to be taken over so that it can be fixed. Yeah, that's going to be a contentious one. Oh, it's been very contentious. It's extremely contentious. But you know, and I applaud Chairman Dutton for his leadership in that, because he came from Fifth Ward. Mm-hmm. And so those folks have become comfortable with the school to prison pipeline. And he had the courage to step up as a African American Democrat and file the bill. And then Senator Betancourt filed a bill on the Senate side.
Really?
And a Democrat and Republican working together to try to fix education in the state of Texas.
I think that's great. What is just generally, where can we improve on school choice in Texas? What's the state of the school choice debate in Texas?
We're moving the needle north with school choice in Texas. And that's a good thing because, and what I found out is most of our rural areas are not so big on school choice. And I didn't anticipate that. I thought that, that most conservatives would be strong backers and supporters of school choice. But some of our rural areas, because the school in their town is the biggest employer in their town, they're not very big on school choice. And so I think, as we continue to educate people in the urban centers, how important it is for parents to have the ability to make those choices and for their children, and back that, I think school choice is going to continue to move forward.
It is contentious. The other reason I'm told by parents is like, look, we pay high property taxes for this great school, and we don't want a flood of new students. I mean, that's the other sort of not in my backyard kind of mentality. Now, so yeah, that's why it's contentious. I mean, But
charter schools, charter schools do very, very well in some of the areas where schools are failing. If you look at KIPP did a great job. If you look at what Mike Feinberg and Mattress Mac are doing over there at Gallery Furniture.
Right, they have a really big vocational training program that they've set up. We went and toured it not too long, before the pandemic. It was great. Mattress Mac is a local hero.
Yeah,
only people from Houston have been watching. I've been since I was growing up. Mattress save you money. I got to when I got into politics and I got to meet him, I was like, I know you, since I was a little kid.
Yeah, save you money.
Yeah, and he's such an incredible philanthropist. I mean, he really does amazing things for the community.
He cares a lot about the Houston community.
And so one thing you've written about too is environmental justice. This is right in my bailiwick. I'm on the subcommittee for environment and climate change on the Energy and Commerce committees. I'm always debating the climate change debate and energy. Now I like to call it energy justice because what the argument goes, environmental justice is about they use race to forward their preferred solutions with respect to climate change. And there's these claims out there that poor people are adversely affected by climate change, by air pollution. This is generally evidence-free, right? They say poor people are more likely to live next to highways. I don't see how that's true given the highway system in Houston, for instance. I live right next to a highway. We don't have, anyway. Yeah. I think we all know the truth on that. And the other question I always ask them is, where is it they're like, I hear from my Democrat friends a lot. They're like, and there's a refinery right next to a low-income community. I want to say, where do you think they work? Where is it you think these jobs are coming from before you just take a hammer to this refinery that you don't like because of some religious adherence to your climate change mantra? Think about where these people work, and what's worse for them. This. I mean, it's frustrating. I mean, give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, I think ignorance is public enemy number one, and buying into a slogan of climate change is and thinking that if I'm making a difference here in America, it's going to save the planet, not knowing that all of the emissions in the United States only represents 15% of the emissions around the world. So if we stop emitting anything, and we just go straight down to zero emissions, the world, if we don't stop China, if we don't stop Russia, and we don't stop those other nations from doing what they're doing, which they do exactly what they want to do and don't want to comply, it's not going to make a big difference at all.
The stat to remember on this one is if all, not just the United States, all developed nations stopped emitting right now and forever, we would potentially, and this is only potentially, decrease the temperature in 2100 by 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So in other words, nothing. In other words, nothing, and nothing really changes. So it's a cost benefit, and that's exactly the right place to start the discussion. Like, what do you get from this? When you destroy this industry and destroy all these jobs,
that's the point. That's the point
what's
right there.
the benefit?
That's the point there. You know, when we take ourselves out of the game economically, you know, what are you getting for it? Mm-hmm. You know, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. When you don't know, it'll cost you what, trillions and trillions. Yeah. You know, based on and you hear folks are going out there. Look, we got 12 years left. You know,
that's just a lie.
I know. You got 12 years left.
You know, they talk about listening to the science. I mean, I only use UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change data. I only use the data from the consensus. And the data and they lie about the data. They just lie. Like there's going to be costs associated with climate change here and there. It's you know, it's not nothing, but it's pretty damn close actually to, you know, here's another stat that's good to remember. In 2100, if, you know, trying to adapt to climate change on its current trajectory, will cost us globally about 4% of GDP, between 4 and 5% of GDP. But keep in mind, that's not 4% less than now. That's 4% less than it otherwise will be when we have 2 to 3 times more GDP than we have now.
Exactly.
So it's not nothing, not a denier in any way. And as I tell my Democrat friends, like, I want to reduce global emissions. I just have much smarter ways to do it. Let's invest in nuclear and actually exporting more of our natural gas resources because it's cleaner energy. This isn't rocket science.
No. But the argument from the other side is going to always come up race.
Yeah, but it's it's like we're talking about environmentalism. It's like you're a racist.
No. I got a hammer.
Yeah.
I got a hammer.
Yeah, you got the hammer.
Here goes the nail.
Right.
Here's the racist thing, you know, because when you don't have any other tools in your toolbox, that's the only thing you're going to run to. And the biggest thing on climate change, I mean, we had become energy independent under the last administration. And moving toward energy independence means you don't have to go out and purchase oil from people who hate you.
Yeah.
You know,
nice.
and so, yeah, matter of fact, we're selling. I mean, we're selling and distributing oil around the globe. Now, isn't that a better position to be in than the one we're reducing ourselves back to now in this current administration? It makes all the sense in the world, right?
Right.
And then another thing is, how many of us are going to put our cars up and don't drive them anymore until we can go get an electric car?
Which is not cheap, by the way.
Well, you know, here's what I'm wondering. You know, all the lawmakers up on Capitol Hill that are saying that we need to go wind and solar and we need to get away from fossil fuels, I'd be interested to see how many of them are all driving electric cars and their families are all driving electric cars and all their friends are all driving electric cars. I would wager that they're not.
They're definitely not. There's a large amount of hypocrisy, but it gets back to the question of what's the benefit here. It takes about 20,000 miles of driving for that electric car to surpass or to use it to see the carbon benefits of it. Right, because there's a large amount of carbon intensive production that goes into making the electric car, more so than a normal car. So after about 20,000 miles, you're getting less. But so in the aggregate, it's just not that big of a change. And this is why I look for, like, where's our real pollution? Where's our real global emissions coming from? India, China, coal burning facilities. We should have a massive project in America to just export more natural gas there that is cheap enough that's cheap enough that they would buy it and it would work. And this is not an impossible feat. We have like endless reserves of natural gas under the ground in West Texas. It's massive.
Let me ask you another question though. Where do they get the electricity to power up the electric cars?
Coal. Yeah, usually coal. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Because, I mean, I don't want to make that. I do a lot of podcasts on energy, so I don't want to make this. My audience is used to listening to it, but it's very frustrating. It's easy to have this debate with them. It is. I can win it every time, but that's why they go to race. That's why we talk about environmental justice.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Race, then, race is just what is our racial environmental injustice in terms of racism. Look, man, that's just a tool that folk throw out when they don't have the data to win the debate.
That's why it's important to talk about energy justice. Don't you want people to, because and you wrote about this, if TPPF did a study, showed if we went to a Green New Deal, you'd have just over $3,000 in additional electricity costs per year. So what does that do to an inner city family? What does it do in your gas price? Like a lot of, if you're higher income, you don't really notice gas prices as much, but lower income certainly notices it. And why is there higher gas prices? Because here's why. Look, I mean, the pandemic didn't help, right? A lot of production stopped, and it's hard to restart it. But it's hard to restart it because if you're an investor and you're looking at, okay, do I want to invest in this new this new well to get more gas out of the ground? I don't know, because the Biden administration hates this industry and is going to permit it to hell. That's why, so you're seeing less and less investment. Yeah. We look at why did the grid fail in Texas? It's not necessarily because of wind or renewables, but it is because they have sucked up a lot of the investments over time, and we're not building new plants that are not weather dependent, like natural gas, coal, and nuclear. You build a bunch of nuclear plants, you don't have that problem. And so the solution is not more wind, but if you look at our energy mix over time, right now projected, it's more wind, and it's like, that's all. That makes you feel nice and fuzzy inside, I suppose. But when you got to freeze or it's really, really hot.
What happens when the wind's not blowing?
When the wind's not blowing, don't forget just weather events. It's just sometimes the wind doesn't blow. They're like, oh, we'll build a bunch of batteries. Yeah, you're just going to build a bunch of batteries? No, you need to look more into battery technology. They're building a big battery facility, Tesla is, here in Houston. And it's like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like, it's the future. But it's like, okay, this powers 10,000 homes for like 4 hours.
Right.
And then it's done. So,
but who knows that though, Dan? The general public they don't know that unless they engage in a conversation with us or some folks who are in the know. They have no clue about that. Only thing they do is they watch Channel 13, they watch or they watch MSNBC, MSNDC, what is that, Democrat group?
Yeah.
And then, CNN, Clinton Network News, unless they watch those, and then they get all of their feedback from those channels, and they don't think about it. It's opinion news. It's not real news. And so folks are drilling them day in and day out with their opinions. So that's why I like what you're doing with your podcast, because you're seeking to get real information out to real people.
That's why we do it. Man. What other topics would you want to broach? Before we end is. I
think it's very important for us to understand our history, but not be. Only to learn from our history and move forward and to look forward. Booker T. Washington, what I really would like for your audience to know about Booker T. Washington, he was a remarkable man. He lived 59 years, and in 59 years, he was able to create a university that stands to this day, Tuskegee University, that educates thousands and thousands of people, Americans, not just black Americans, but Americans. And Booker T. Washington always sought to lift the veil of ignorance off of from our eyes so that we could see the truth. And I would also like for him to know that Booker T. Washington collaborated with folks who were very powerful folks who had like minds and same ideas. No one knew that he collaborated with Rosenthal, Julius Rosenthal, to build the Rosenthal schools, 5,000 schools across America, making sure that we educate folks in America, no matter what the skin color was, no matter what the race was, to elevate, the educational level of Americans. And so at the end of the day, we're all one nation, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And with no schisms, no separations among ourselves. There is no one better than the other. We have wonderful ideas. And we have an opportunity in a country as great as America to explore those wonderful ideas and not just make America great again, but keep America great as it's always been.
Well, thank you. Great way to end. Richard, appreciate you being on.
Thank you, my friend. Pleasure being here.
Absolutely.